The sun had burned 3 straight days across the station platform, the wooden boards so hot they splintered and blistered the bare feet of 7 children huddled in a knot too tight for air. Their clothes hung loose, threadbare as rags, faces streaked with soot and coal dust, hair unwashed, eyes hollow with the kind of hunger that steals both sleep and childhood. The eldest, a girl of perhaps 13, clutched a cracked leather satchel to her chest, as if it were the last rope tying them to the world. Its straps were frayed, its flap loose, but inside rested a weathered Bible wrapped in ribbon. And every time a stranger's shadow passed too close, her grip tightened until her knuckles turned white. The youngest, a boy of 3, whimpered against her lap until his voice frayed into hoarse gasps, and his silence was somehow worse than his crying. Passers-by muttered sharp comments, some pausing only long enough to spit disdain. 3 days here and no kin come forward. Pitiful, a woman whispered to her companion. Best the county haul them off before disease sets in, another said, quickening his stride. Some laughed openly when the youngest tried to reach for a dropped crust, batting his hand away like he was a stray pup. Yet through all of it the children clung to one another, thin arms knotted in a shield of bone and courage. Elias Redfeather. I have carried this image in my heart, for there are sights a man wishes to forget but never can, and I tell you, no jury of law ever sat heavier than that bench where 7 orphans waited to be seen. From the far end of the platform came the sound of boots, slow, measured, unhurried. A tall rancher, shoulders broad as a barn beam, hat low over eyes that missed nothing, stood by the freight car and had watched long enough. Dust streaked his shirt, his face shadowed with both sun and silence. But when the smallest child coughed, a dry, broken rattle, something in him shifted. He strode forward, each step cutting through the whispers, his spurs clinking like steel punctuation in a sentence of defiance. Gasps rose when he reached the children. Without a word, he bent low and swept the youngest into his left arm, then pulled 2 more against his chest, shifted the eldest onto his back with one steady movement, hooked 2 small boys beneath the strength of his right arm, and lifted the last onto his hip until all 7 clung to him at once, like branches to a single trunk. The crowd erupted in disbelief. A storm of voices clashing in outrage and awe. "Has he lost his mind?" cried one. "He'll never keep them," hissed another. Yet still others hushed, stunned into silence at the sight of one man carrying what the world had declared a burden too heavy to bear. The eldest girl, her face pressed against his back, whispered through cracked lips, "Sir, please don't leave one behind." Her words trembled, not command but plea, and his silence answered louder than any oath. The station master barreled forward, vest straining over his belly, voice booming above the murmurs. "Hold there! Those children aren't yours to claim!" His hand sliced the air as though to seize authority itself, his face red with fury at defiance. But the rancher did not flinch, his arms steady beneath the fragile weight of 7 lives. Elias Redfeather. In that moment the dust itself seemed to still, for mercy moves slower than judgment, but when it comes, it bends the air around it, and all who breathe it know the truth, that strength isn't proven in fists or land, but in the arms that refuse to let go. The station master planted himself like a bull at a gate, sweat bright on his brow as the rancher stood with 7 children clinging to him, and the cracked satchel trapped beneath the eldest girl's elbow, its blue ribbon peeking like a small, stubborn vein of sky. "Put them down," he barked, voice built to command timetables and freight, not mercy. "Until the county clerk rules these miners are railway property." The word property scraped over the platform boards. A few men nodded as if law were a blanket to pull tight. Others flinched as if the syllable were a whip to the back. The eldest girl gathered herself. "I'm Hester," she said, hoarse but steady, pointing with her chin as she named them in a line that made them human instead of freight. "Bram, Linny, Sol, Prue, Thatch, Jolie." Jolie coughed a dry, empty little cough and tucked his face against the rancher's collar like a sparrow hiding under a roof beam. "Names don't change order," the station master snapped, slicing the air with a flat palm toward the office. "Telegraph is gone. The sheriff will partition them by sundown. Until then, they remain in my custody." A rival voice cut through the heat. Merrick Cole, rancher in title, scavenger at heart, sauntered forward with his thumbs hooked in his belt as if the whole platform were his corral. "I'll claim the 3 oldest lawful," he drawled, smile thin as a wire. "Fence posts don't set themselves. County will thank me." A few men made the kind of sound men make when they like the flavor of a plan that costs them nothing. Near the ticket wicket, an elderly widow shaded her eyes and leaned in. "That ribbon," she murmured, voice papery but clear. "I stitched little crosses like that for the church parcels last winter. Those boxes were bound for Harrow's Ford Clinic." "How does a clinic ribbon come tied round an orphan's Bible 2 towns away?" The station master gave her a look meant to send a needle back to its cushion. "Mind your thread, Miss Pike." Elias Redfeather. "I have learned that knots are never cut by shouts. They come loose when one small truth is tugged by a hand everyone else ignored." The rancher shifted his hold and, with one careful sweep, set the children upon a bench while keeping his body a wall between them and the crowd. He crouched so his eyes met theirs at level, as if taking a measurement only he needed to know. "Bram," he said, and the boy tried on courage like a coat a little too big. "Linny," who tucked a stray braid and did not let go of Jolie. "Sol," lips moving as he counted the nails in the slat beneath his fingers. Prue, who hugged the satchel as if it were breath. Thatch, jaw set as if wind itself had dared him. Jolie, the cough rasping, and finally, Hester, whose shoulders held all 7 like a yoke she refused to drop. The station master signaled 2 railway men. One uncoiled a length of cord strung with tin tags stamped with numbers. "Marks," the master said briskly. "So they aren't lost when dispersed." The word dispersed slid through the platform like a cold draft under a door. Bram swatted the air as if at a wasp. "Don't tag my sisters," he said, voice shaking but standing on its toes to sound tall. The rancher's hand settled on the boy's shoulder, steadying him without pinning him. "If it's law you want," the rancher said evenly, eyes on the master, "start with truth. Show the receipt that says the county fed them a single biscuit in 3 days." The master's mouth pinched like a bad stitch. "My work is order. Bread is the clerk's." Inside the office, the telegraph key began to chatter. The operator, a young woman with ink-smudged fingers, read the strip, swallowed hard, and slid it out beneath the wicket. Color climbed the master's neck as he read. "Sheriff convenes placement hearing at sundown to divide wards by suitability and need." Merrick Cole's smile gleamed like a small blade. "There. I'll take Hester, Bram, and Sol. The rest can scatter where they scatter." Hester stood up, blue ribbon trembling between her fingers. "Our mama wrapped this round her Bible the night before we buried her beyond the tracks," she said. "The churchwoman sewed the cross. We ain't strays. We're hers." Agnes Pike lifted a thin hand. "I stitched that cross," she said, voice steadying with the memory. "If that ribbon came here on a freight bill instead of prayer, then something meant for the sick was sold along the way." Murmurs rose, uneasy, thorned, a sound like brush hiding a snake. "Sermons don't feed cattle," Merrick said, bored with the shape of pity. The railwayman reached with the tags. The rancher caught his wrist, not cruel, not loud, iron enough to stop a train of habit. "No tags," he said. "No dispersing." The master drew breath to roar, but a church bell tolled from town. One hard note. The telegraph clacked again, faster now. The operator blanched and whispered without meaning to, "He's bringing the partition chain." The word chain hopped ear to ear until even the steel rails seemed to listen. The rancher straightened and, for the first time, gave the platform his name. "Calder Reed," he said. "I'll take these 7 to shade and bread until sundown. Any man who lays a tag on them before the hearing answers to me." He lifted Jolie and the satchel in one motion. The others rose like a small tide around his boots. Merrick stepped into the path. Smile turned to wire. "You'll answer to the badge, Reed, Elias Redfeather. Mercy is not fangless. It simply chooses which throat to spare." Down the road a dust plume rose, and inside it the sun flashed on iron. The sheriff's wagon rattled into view, and coiled over its rail lay a length of dull metal, tin numbers winking like little blind eyes as it bumped closer to the platform edge. The sheriff's wagon ground to a halt with the squeal of tired wheels, and the sight of the partition chain draped across its rail spread a hush heavier than any sermon bell. Tin tags dangled from it, each stamped with a number, each meant to sort flesh from flesh the way a rancher marks cattle. Sheriff Brandt climbed down slow, his boots measured, his eyes scanning the children with the weary calculation of a man who had long ago traded compassion for procedure. "Calder Reed," he said, squinting as if the name itself carried dust. "I've heard of your stubbornness. This isn't your fight." The crowd pressed closer, eager for spectacle. Their faces a shifting sea of pity, curiosity, and hunger for order. Merrick Cole's grin stretched wide, his voice loud enough to carry. "Sheriff, the county needs hands, not mouths. I'll take the 3 oldest, feed them, work them. The rest can be scattered where they won't starve in one man's kitchen. You know I've the acres to make use of them." He swept his arm, as if presenting a herd at market, his eyes bright with ownership before the claim was even settled. The children pressed together, Prue clutching the satchel so tightly the leather creaked, Sewell whispering a count under his breath like prayer beads. Bram stepping forward with fists clenched, though his knees knocked. Hester found her voice, thin but steady. "We're not fence posts. We're mamas." She raised the ribboned Bible high, and the cross stitched by Agnes Pike gleamed faintly in the sun. Elias Redfeather. I have seen many crowds lean toward the strong voice, but sometimes the smallest mouth, cracked and dry, can tilt the weight of an entire town. The sheriff's jaw tightened, but his eyes never softened. "The law's clear," he said. "Without papers, kin, or deed, they belong to the county, to be placed where the town decides." Merrick stepped closer, his shadow falling across the children. "Then place them with me," he pressed. "Strong backs, empty bellies. They'll earn their keep. Reed can't even feed 7 with his own herd dying in this drought." Laughter sparked, quick and cutting, from a knot of men who always laughed when Merrick did. Calder Reed adjusted the youngest, Jolie, higher against his chest, and finally spoke, his voice low but carrying like the rumble of distant thunder. 3 days they waited, and no county hand brought bread. 3 days, and not one man here claimed responsibility. You talk of order, but order abandoned them first. His words stirred unease. A ripple of shame that bent a few heads, though others sneered deeper to hide it. Merrick leaned close enough that only those nearest could smell the sour on his breath. "You'll ruin yourself on sentiment, Reed. No herd can fatten on pity. When you fail, I'll be waiting to gather what's left." Calder turned his gaze to the sheriff. "If law is so eager to weigh them, then let it weigh more than numbers. Let it weigh the truth of what they've carried. He nodded to Hester, who held the Bible aloft with trembling arms. This satchel is their proof, and if the law burns it, the law burns them too. The sheriff's eyes flickered. The faintest crack in iron, but Merrick barked a laugh, dragging the moment back. Proof. It's paper and ribbon. Feed them on sermons, Reed, and see how long before they drop in your yard. I'll take them tonight and turn them to work by dawn. The children whimpered as Merrick reached toward them, fingers spread like a net. Calder's boot shifted, planting himself squarely between the children and the farmer, his shoulders filling the space like a barricade. Gasps sparked through the crowd. Whispers racing. He'll fight the sheriff. He's gone mad, Elias Redfeather. I have always known mercy to be mistaken for weakness until it bares its teeth. And that day, Calder Reed's silence carried more danger than Merrick Cole's laughter, for in that pause the whole town understood a line had been drawn. The platform cracked open into chaos the moment Calder Reed shifted his weight. Not with violence, but with decision, and the sound of it rippled louder than a gunshot. He swept the youngest back into the crook of his arm, steadied Hester with his free hand, and herded the rest toward the wagon waiting at the road's edge. The children stumbled, thin legs weak from hunger, but they clung to him like shadows, clutching the satchel between them so tight its worn leather squealed. Merrick Cole lunged, his hand outstretched to seize Sewell by the collar, but Calder swung his body like a gate, the heel of his palm knocking Merrick aside without a word. The crowd gasped as Merrick fell back, dust streaking his fine coat, his curses sharp as thorns. Sheriff Brandt barked for order, his hand hovering near the revolver on his belt, but hesitation clung to him like sweat. The law demanded he act. Yet the sight of 7 children pressed against one man's frame made him pause. Elias Redfeather. There are moments when the law stands taller than any man, and there are moments when the law shrinks beneath the weight of a single human choice. This was one of the latter. Calder lifted Jolie into the wagon bed, then hoisted the others after him. His arms moving with the certainty of a man branding calves, though these were no calves, but souls, with names he already carried in his chest. He climbed onto the bench, seized the reins, and with a snap, the horses lurched forward, iron-shod hooves throwing sparks against the ruts. The wagon jolted hard, the children crying out in a chorus more pitiful than any hymn. Behind them, Merrick scrambled up, shouting to his men, "Mount, after him! He won't make it to the ridge!" Several riders spurred their horses, dust plumes rising like storm clouds, the chain of partition still rattling in the sheriff's wagon, as if eager to be used. The townfolk spilled into the road, some shouting encouragement, others jeering, none willing to step between. Hester clutched the satchel tight against her ribs, whispering a litany only her siblings knew. Names, memories, fragments of a mother buried without marker. Bram, seated beside her, balled his fists and muttered, "I'll fight him if he comes close." Prue buried her face against Hester's shoulder, tears soaking into the fabric of her dress. Calder's jaw clenched, his eyes fixed ahead as the road narrowed into the canyon path. "Hold on," he said, voice low but steady. "Don't look back." His words cut through their whimpers. Not a promise, but a command born of survival. Behind them, the riders closed in, their laughter slicing the air. Merrick's voice carried cruel and sure. "Run, Reed. You'll starve with them or hang for theft, but you won't keep them." Calder snapped the reins harder, the horses straining, nostrils flaring, wheels bouncing dangerously near the canyon's edge. Stones clattered down the slope into emptiness, a warning of how narrow the path had grown. The children clutched each other, Sewell counting louder under his breath, as if numbers could stitch courage into the air, while Linny whispered prayers she half remembered from Mama's voice. Elias Redfeather. The land itself leaned close, holding its breath, for even earth and stone know the weight of lives balanced on a wheel's edge. The sound of pursuit thickened, hooves hammering like war drums, and the canyon walls echoed every strike until it seemed an army followed them. Jolie coughed a rasp that rattled his thin chest, and Calder reached one hand back to steady him without loosening his grip on the reins. Ahead, the canyon curved tight, the road splitting, one path leading towards the open plain, the other toward town and its waiting judgment. Calder pulled the reins, choosing not safety but confrontation. Steering the wagon toward the spire where the church bell could be seen faintly over rooftops. Gasps burst from the children, Bram crying out, "You're going back!" Calder's eyes burned beneath the brim of his hat. I said, "Hold on. If they want to weigh us, we'll make them weigh everything." The wagon roared down the slope, dust veiling it in a cloak, while behind them Merrick's riders howled, scenting blood. Elias Redfeather. And so Mercy fled, not into hiding, but into the jaws of the very law that sought to devour it, carrying 7 souls and one man's silence like a banner none could ignore. The wagon thundered back into town with the rivals' riders close behind, their jeers braiding with the iron clang of hooves until the whole street seemed to shake. Folks spilled from doorways, drawn by the storm of dust and voices, and when Calder reined the horses to a lurching stop before the courthouse steps, the 7 children clutched him like castaways gripping the last plank of a wreck. Sheriff Brandt was already there, broad and steady, the partition chain looped over his shoulder like a priest's stole. His voice boomed, heavy with the kind of authority men mistake for justice. "Calder Reed, you've seized county wards without claim or paper. By law they return to custody and shall be divided before sundown." The crowd hummed approval, a murmur hungry for order. Merrick Cole dismounted, swagger thick with triumph, and spread his hands wide. "You hear the sheriff, Reed. You've no kin here, no deed tying you to these strays, but I'll give them a roof and work. That's more than pity can offer." His eyes roved over Hester and Bram, as though appraising livestock, and he added with a smirk, "The strong ones will earn their keep quick." Hester stiffened, clutching the satchel against her ribs, ribbon trembling, while Bram pressed forward, fists small but clenched. Calder swung down from the wagon and stood before them, dust rising like a veil around his boots. His silence was a wall, broken only when Jolie's cough rattled sharp in the hush. Then Calder spoke, his voice not raised but steady as stone. 3 days these children sat on your platform. If they were the county's concern, they'd have bread in their bellies and water at their lips. If they were the town's burden, then shame falls on every man here who walked past them. You talk of law, I talk of neglect. Elias Redfeather. It is a strange thing to hear mercy make its case, for it needs no ledger, no seal, only the courage to hold a mirror before men who would rather look away. The sheriff's jaw flexed, though his hand tightened on the chain. Intentions don't matter. Order matters. If every man seized what his heart pitied, we'd have chaos. Merrick barked a laugh. There, sense at last. Chaos is 7 mouths Calder Reed can't feed. Chaos is mercy turned to weakness. Give them to me, Sheriff, and I'll put them to use. The children whimpered, and Sewell began to count under his breath faster, as if numbers might outpace fate. Prue clung to Hester's skirt, while Linny whispered, "Mama's book, show them." Hester rose, trembling, and lifted the Bible high so all could see, ribbon frayed but cross still stitched true. "This is ours," she said, voice breaking but clear. "Mama's hands held it, and we buried her with no marker but dirt. This is proof we're hers, and we belong together." The crowd hushed, shame prickling even those who scoffed, but Merrick spat into the dust. "A book don't bind a family. Paper's not kin. Burn it and be done." Sheriff Brandt's eyes flickered as he took the Bible, his thumb brushing its cracked leather. He lifted it into the light, and for a breath it seemed he might soften. But then his voice rang flat as iron. "This proves nothing. At sundown, these children are to be divided, and no more will be said." Gasps rippled. Hester's knees buckled as though the ground had been pulled from beneath her. Calder caught her by the shoulder, his voice low but carrying. "Then at sundown, I'll stand before every man here and show them what law looks like when it burns a dead woman's memory." Elias Redfeather. The West has known duels fought with pistols at dawn, but none cut deeper than a duel fought with silence at sundown, where mercy stands armed only with truth. And as the sheriff closed the Bible and looped the chain tighter across his chest, the crowd leaned closer, waiting to see which would weigh heavier, the law's steel or one rancher's defiance. The sun slid behind the ridge and painted the sky in bruised colors as Calder guided the wagon back toward his ranch, the sheriff's decree clanging louder in his mind than the rattle of the wheels. Behind them, Merrick's riders trailed like vultures, never too near, never far enough to forget. The children huddled in the wagon bed, their thin arms twined together, every jolt of the ruts reminding them of the chain waiting at dawn. When they reached the cabin, Calder lifted each one down, steady and deliberate, as if by slowing his hands he could slow the march of judgment itself. Inside, the cabin walls smelled of wood smoke and dust, bare save for a hearth and a worn table scarred with the marks of work. He set before them bread and milk saved from his stores, and at first the children only stared, as if afraid the food was a mirage. Then hunger broke through, and they ate in silence, crumbs scattering like prayers answered too late. Joely's cough rasped as he swallowed, and Hester tore her piece in half to ease his throat, even as her own lips cracked with thirst. Elias Redfeather. Hunger is more than emptiness in the belly. It gnaws at pride, it steals the memory of laughter, until even stale bread tastes like a miracle. When the plates were clean, the firelight drew the room into a small circle of warmth, and for the first time since the station, the children's shoulders eased. Calder fetched blankets from his own bed, tucking them around the smallest, his rough hands startlingly gentle. He crouched beside Hester, who still clutched the satchel like a shield, the blue ribbon trembling in her fingers. "What's inside means more than paper to you," he said, his voice low. Her eyes glistened, and she opened the flap enough for him to see the cracked Bible, its edges frayed, pages smudged with soot and tears. "Mama read to us every night," she whispered, "even when she couldn't breathe. She read. When she died, we buried her with no stone. This is all that proves she was ours, and we were hers." Calder bowed his head, silent for a long moment, then rested his hand over hers. "No man has the right to burn what holds a family together." Bram, emboldened, sat straighter. "Will you fight them tomorrow?" he asked, his young voice trembling with the weight of the answer. Calder's eyes flicked to the window, where torches glimmered faintly in the distance. "I'll stand between you and the fire," he said simply. The words were not promise enough for Linny, who whispered, "But what if the sheriff takes it anyway?" Calder did not look away. "Then I'll carry what's left, and still you won't be alone." Silence wrapped the cabin then, broken only by the crackle of flame and the soft breaths of children fighting sleep. Prue hummed a tune, half-remembered. Thatch counted nails in the floor until his eyelids drooped, and Sewell traced numbers into the dust with his finger, as if holding chaos at bay with arithmetic. Hester remained awake, her arms wound tight around the satchel, lips moving in whispers too faint for even her brothers to hear. Elias Redfeather. I once thought prayers were meant to rise heavenward, but in truth, the strongest prayers are whispered to the ones already gone, begging them not to leave us fully. Calder sat in the corner, rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the flicker of torchlight beyond the ridge. Dawn would bring the square, the sheriff, and the chain, and he knew mercy alone would not be enough to shield 7 children from a town eager to divide them. As the fire burned low and the children finally drifted into sleep, he tightened his grip on the rifle and whispered into the silence. By sundown, they'll know what it means to call a man's mercy madness. Dawn cracked pale and cold, the kind of light that does not warm, but exposes. And by the time Calder's wagon rolled into the town square, the church bell had already tolled once, calling neighbor against neighbor to witness judgment. The 7 children sat pressed together in the wagon bed, their faces chalk white with fear, the satchel in Hester's lap a fragile anchor in the storm. Every street emptied into the square until the crowd swelled thick, whispers buzzing like hornets, eager to see whether law would break mercy in full daylight. Sheriff Brandt stood on the courthouse steps, the partition chain coiled heavy over his arm, its tin tags gleaming like teeth. His voice carried as he raised a hand. This matter is plain. 7 children, no kin, no papers, no deed. The county claims them, and by law they must be divided for their own survival. The murmurs swelled, some nodding, some looking away. Merrick Cole shoved forward, loud as a rooster. Sheriff, you know my acres. You know my need. I claim the 3 oldest, Hester, Bram, Saul. They'll work fence lines by noon. The others can scatter as fit. His words rang with confidence, and a knot of men shouted approval, eager for order that cost them nothing. Calder climbed down from the wagon, his boots sounding like hammer blows against the boards, and turned to lift the children one by one, lining them at his side. Joely clung to his collar, coughing into the fabric, but Calder's arms stayed steady. They are not fence posts, he said, voice even but sharp as a drawn blade. They are not freight to be tallied by weight. For 3 days this town let them starve, and only now do you speak of survival. Elias Redfeather. There are times when truth doesn't need to roar. It needs only to be said where all can hear, so no man may later claim he did not know. The sheriff shifted, discomfort stirring behind his badge. But he held the chain firm. The law stands, Reed. Mercy cannot govern a county. Calder's silence lasted long enough to make men uneasy, and then he stepped aside, gesturing for Hester. Her knees trembled as she clutched the satchel, but she lifted it high, pulling the Bible into the light, the faded ribbon trembling like a banner. "This is Mama's," she said, voice thin but carrying. "She read it to us until she couldn't breathe, and when she died, she gave it to me. This is our proof. We're hers, and we belong together." The crowd hushed, eyes fixed on the worn leather, the stitched cross shining faintly. Some women lowered their heads. Some men shuffled as though a stone had been dropped into their chests. Merrick broke the silence with a bark of laughter. "A book don't make kin. If that's all they've got, toss it to the fire and be done. Better ashes than mouths to feed." His words slashed the hush, and a ripple of shame followed. Sheriff Brandt took the Bible, his thumb brushing the cover, and for a moment his jaw tightened, as though he felt the weight of more than leather in his hand. Then his face hardened, voice cold. "This is not proof of claim. This is paper. Law demands more." Gasps rippled outward. Hester staggered as if struck, clutching the ribbon back to her chest when he tried to hand it down. Calder's eyes darkened, his body a wall between the sheriff and the children. Elias Redfeather. I have seen men laugh at mercy, I have seen men burn it, but I have never seen it bow willingly, and that day I knew it would not bow to fire without a fight. The sheriff lifted the Bible high, his hand drifting toward the torch that smoked at the edge of the square, and the children cried out as one, their voices breaking the morning stillness. The crowd leaned forward, breathless, waiting to see if justice would be silenced by flame. The torch at the edge of the square spat sparks into the morning air, its smoke curling like a serpent toward the Bible clutched in the sheriff's grip, and the crowd pressed closer, some hungry for flame, others shivering at the thought of burning a dead woman's last gift. Merrick Cole thrust his hand toward the fire, his voice cutting sharp. "Do it, Sheriff! Burn it and end this farce! No book feeds bellies, no ribbon keeps strays alive! Strip Reed of his pride and give me what I've claimed!" The children whimpered in unison, and Hester stumbled forward, thin arms outstretched, her voice cracking. "Please, don't take her from us twice. Mama gave us this when the ground took her body. It's all we have left to prove we were hers." Her knees buckled, and she fell against Calder's side, clutching the ribbon until her fingers bled pale. But her eyes never left the book. Elias Redfeather. A child's plea is sharper than any lawyer's tongue, for it cuts through pride and lands in the marrow of every man who still remembers his own mother's voice. The sheriff's hand trembled, the firelight flickering against the sweat on his brow, yet his mouth still formed words of iron. "Dead women leave no deeds. The county cannot bend law for sentiment." Merrick grinned wide, striding nearer. "You hear her confession? They've no proof, no kin, no worth. Give them over and let me put them to work before the week is out." Calder stepped forward then, his voice carrying across the square, low but thunderous. "What they carry is not paper. It is blood, sweat, memory. It is their name. Burn it, and you burn the truth of who they are." He turned toward the crowd, eyes sweeping faces that had jeered only yesterday. "How many of you buried mothers with nothing but dirt for a stone? How many carry scraps of ribbon, a hymn, a verse as proof you belonged to someone once? Would you let that burn and call yourselves men?" A murmur spread like wind through dry grass. Women clutched their shawls tighter, old men shifted, guilt flickering in their eyes. Even Agnes Pike, thin as thread, raised her voice. "That ribbon is mine. I stitched it for the clinic. If it found its way here, someone profited off the sick, and these children carry the proof. If you burn it, you burn the evidence of theft." Gasps rippled, and the crowd's hunger for flame faltered into unease. Merrick snarled, shoving past a farmer. "Lies from a spinster. The chain waits, Sheriff. Don't falter now." He reached towards the children, his hand like a claw. Bram stepped forward, planting himself between Merrick and his sisters, his fists trembling but raised. "We're not yours," he shouted, his voice thin but piercing. "We belong to her, and now to him." He jerked his chin at Calder. The boy's defiance jolted the crowd, silence falling heavy as stone. Elias Redfeather. "I tell you, no sermon preached louder than that child's frail shout, for in it stood a truth no torch could consume." The sheriff froze, Bible in one hand, chain in the other, his face caught between law and conscience. The crowd's murmur rose to a demand, some urging him to burn, others hissing for restraint. And in that fevered moment Merrick lunged, fingers grasping for the ribbon, spittle flying as he roared, "Mine or no man's!" Calder caught his wrist mid-air, the strength of his grip halting him cold. The crowd gasped, women clutching children, men stepping back. The sheriff's eyes widened, torn between duty and dread, and the fire spat higher, smoke curling like judgment itself. And there the square hung, suspended between flame and mercy, every breath waiting to see if the Bible would fall to ash, or if one man's grip could still change the tide of a town. The sheriff's hand shook, as if the weight of the Bible scorched hotter than the torch itself, his badge glinting like a false sun as the crowd surged in restless waves. Merrick snarled, twisting in Calder's grip, spittle at his lips, his free hand clawing for the ribboned satchel that Prue clutched to her chest with desperate strength. "You can't hold them, Reed," Merrick spat, his voice ragged with fury. "Law will chain them, and I'll work them till they break." Calder's silence cracked then, his voice rising in a roar that startled even the horses tethered nearby. "No law can chain what love has already claimed." His grip wrenched Merrick's arm back, sending the man sprawling into the dust, curses swallowed by the gasp of the crowd. Elias Redfeather. I have seen gunfights that ended quicker than that moment, for nothing kills a man's pride faster than mercy that refuses to kneel. Calder stepped forward, boots hammering against the boards, and seized the Bible from the sheriff's trembling hand in one swift motion. Sparks flew as the torch licked close, but the leather did not catch. Instead, the sight of the rancher lifting it high above his head stilled the square. "This is not paper," Calder thundered. "This is a mother's voice, her proof, her blessing, her chain stronger than iron. Burn it, and you burn yourselves." The children surged toward him, their small hands clinging to his coat, their eyes bright with fear and wonder as though they had seen a giant rise in their defense. Merrick staggered up, his face red, his breath coming in ragged growls. "You'll hang for this, Reed. Blood or not, they're not yours. When the county sees, they'll strip you of herd and land." Calder lowered the Bible into Hester's trembling hands, steadying her as though passing down not just words, but an inheritance of defiance. "Blood doesn't make family," he said, his voice like iron driven into oak. "Love does, and I'll stand against every man here before I let you tear that truth apart." The words cut through the square, sharper than any bullet, and the silence that followed was heavier than chains. The sheriff lowered his gaze, shame etched in every line of his face, his hand slipping from the revolver at his hip. Women wept softly. Men shifted as if their boots suddenly pressed against stones. Agnes Pike's thin voice rose, trembling but clear. "He speaks true. We left them to starve, and he fed them. We shunned them, and he lifted them all. What right have we to take them now?" Merrick spun on her with venom. "Old fool, your stitches don't bind law." But no one moved to laugh with him. His grin faltered, crumbling like clay in rain, and in that collapse, his strength bled into silence. Elias Redfeather. A crowd turns faster than a river in flood, mockery one breath, shame the next, and I tell you, that day shame was the stronger current. Calder placed the Bible against Hester's chest, his hand covering hers, and looked once more to the sheriff. "Choose now, fire or mercy. But know this, if you choose fire, you'll have to burn me first." The crowd held its breath. The torch sputtered low, and in the heartbeat that followed, the town knew that mercy, once lifted high, would not bow to ash. The morning sun crept higher, spilling gold across the square as if the heavens themselves wished to witness the verdict. And in that light, Sheriff Brandt's shoulders sagged, the chain slipping from his arm to clatter against the boards, like the sound of law surrendering to something older. His hand, once rigid around judgment, now hung limp at his side, and when he finally spoke, his voice cracked like dry wood. "Take them, Reed. If the county calls it theft, let it call me guilty too." A murmur swept the crowd. First shock, then relief, and finally shame that settled deep in the throats of those who had jeered the loudest. Merrick Cole roared in protest, lunging again, but no man stepped aside for him this time. Instead, Hands once idle pressed against his chest, shoving him back, faces once eager for his laughter turned away, and the sneer that had carried him so far collapsed into silence. Elias Redfeather. I have watched pride undone by bullet and rope, but never have I seen it fall faster than when an entire town turned its eyes to the dirt rather than share its shame. Calder knelt before the children, his hand steady as he lifted the Bible and pressed it into Hester's arms. "This is yours," he said, voice low but sure. "It always was, and no man here will ever burn it again." Hester's tears streaked the coal dust from her face, and she whispered, "Why did you fight for us when you didn't even know our names?" Calder's jaw softened, his voice carrying across the hush of the square. "Because you waited 3 days, and still you held on to each other. Because you carried her memory when no one else would. Because mercy is worth more than land." The children pressed against him then, Bram's fists unclenching as he gripped Calder's coat, Linny wrapping her arms around his neck, Jolie coughing but smiling faintly as his tiny hand touched the scorched leather of the Bible. The youngest whispered a single word, fragile but unbroken, "Father," and the others echoed it, their voices rising together like a hymn too long unsung. Merrick spat dust and mounted his horse, curses trailing like smoke as he fled. A man defeated not by bullets but by mercy that refused to bow. The sheriff unpinned his badge and held it out as though it weighed more than iron, then tucked it away without a word, stepping aside. The crowd began to disperse in silence, no one daring to meet Calder's eyes, for they knew they had witnessed not weakness, but strength, too rare for them to claim as their own. Calder gathered the children into the wagon once more, setting the Bible at its center, its ribbon fluttering in the morning breeze like a banner of defiance and grace. As he took the reins, Hester leaned close, her voice steady now. "We'll never wait hungry on a platform again." Calder nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "From this day forward, you are mine, and I am yours." The wagon rolled away, dust rising behind like a veil of blessing, and the sound of 7 voices whispering, "Father," followed it down the road until it blended with the wind itself. Elias Redfeather. And so it was. In the year when law tried to weigh children like cattle and failed, that a rancher lifted 7 in his arms and carried them into a life that could never again be divided. I am Elias Redfeather, and this story, like the land itself, will remain long after we are gone. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. That Bible carried their mother's voice, and in the end, it saved them all. If you had been in that square, with the torch raised high, would you have stepped forward to protect it, too?